confirmed by the Senate. That's what my legislation would do, as well as impose 5-year terms and a 2-term limit.
Great, thank you so much, Andy, for the
And
question.
I would just add, Andy, when you talk about 5-year terms and a 2-term limit, that also means that for a new postmaster general, there will be the opportunity for the Senate to review their performance midway through their tenure and determine whether or not they've demonstrated the competence to remain in that office.
Now, that's unusual for government officials, and please correct me if I'm wrong. That's unusual, right?
It depends. There are some Senate confirmed roles that are bound in time and with term limits, and some that are not. There are some rollover with the change of administration, so it depends on the office.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Andy. Looks like we had 2 questions in the chat from 11 Alive. We'll turn it over to you guys to refer to what order you'd like to ask those 2 questions.
Senator Ossoff, this is Liza Lucas from XIA. Thank you for your time today. I just had 2 quick questions. Obviously, a lot of bipartisan frustration during the April hearing. Do you have the same bipartisan support already for the legislation that you're putting forth?
Well, I hope to build it. I always try to work across the aisle wherever possible. That's how, for example, just this morning, I was able to move through a key U.S. Senate committee my bipartisan legislation to crack down on fentanyl trafficking at the southern border of the United States. I do believe that the frustration with U.S. Postal Service incompetence and the incompetence of USPS leadership is bipartisan in Georgia and across the country. And it's focused on incompetent management. Postal workers are out there every day working their hearts out to deliver the mail on time. But when they don't have the competent leadership and competent management at the top to get the job done, we see the kinds of performance failures we've seen in Georgia.
Great. Liza, did you have another question?
Also, just looking at this historically, the 1970 Act by President Nixon, it seems that designed USPS to be an independent agency, more independent of the executive branch. And according to USPS, this was also in part due to a need for separation from political influence. How does what you're doing now, what you're proposing now by making this again an appointed position by the president, confirmed by the Senate, how does that work together with the 1970 Act? I know it would be an amendment, but it seems it could conflict with a part of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my legislation will change the process by which the American people hire the Postmaster General, so that the elected representatives of the American people have the opportunity to interrogate the qualifications, the track record, the competence, and the plans and vision of a nominee for this role. This is a job that so impacts our day-to-day lives that the elected representatives of the people need the opportunity to ask tough questions about whether or not a candidate for this job is qualified. This is a job of such importance that there needs to be a real job interview with those the people elect to confirm the most important officials in the federal government.
All right, great. Thank you, Liza, for those 2 questions. I next have up Jill Nolan from Georgia Recorder. That's the last question I have in the queue. If anyone else has one, please let me know, but we'll go over now to Jill.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Senator. This is an unrelated question, but it's in the context of the work you've been doing with the field hearings on the impact of Georgia's 6-week abortion ban. ProPublica has reported on the deaths of in Georgia of 2 deaths that could be tied to the state's abortion law and that have been deemed preventable by the Maternal Mortality Review Committee. And I wanted to see if you had any comments on those 2 cases, particularly, like I said, in the context of the work you've been doing.
Well, look, my heart goes out to the families of those who lost their lives in these tragic circumstances. I have seen the reports. I am not familiar enough with the details of either of these particular medical cases to provide a comment on them specifically. But what I can tell you is what we have heard in testimony from Georgia women who have experienced pregnancy under our state's extreme 6-week abortion ban, and from Georgia OBGYNs who have testified to my subcommittee that doctors who treat pregnant women in Georgia so fear criminal prosecution for providing healthcare services that care to pregnant women in Georgia is denied, care to pregnant women in Georgia is delayed. And we heard from 2 women testifying before my subcommittee earlier this year that they were forced to continue with non-viable or high-risk pregnancies, or to travel out of state to get care because their doctors feared prosecution or loss of their licenses. And we're talking about women who are experiencing seriously dangerous complications in pregnancy, or who are miscarrying, whose doctors told them that they were too afraid to even, in some cases, walk them through their options, that they needed to seek care out of state.
All right, great. We are getting close to the senator being up in a committee hearing. So if we have some short questions, let's go one more to 11 Alive. I see a short question from Veronica at WSB, Julian at WABE, and then we're probably gonna need to wrap.
Senator Ossoff, Julian Virgin, WABE News. Good to see you again, man. Could you just let us know the next steps?
Yeah, this is like twice in 5 days, Julian. Thank you for covering my recent work focused on helping service members who are leaving the armed forces to access their veterans benefits. And the next steps here are to build bipartisan support in the Senate and the House and try to move this legislation through the process. This is a starting point. Here's the proposition. If you want to be Postmaster General of the United States, you should have to go through a job interview with the elected representatives of the American people. And after 5 years, you should have to reapply for the job and be interviewed again so your performance can be judged and you can be held accountable for the commitments that you made. That's what we're going to try to build bipartisan support for. And that's the hard work of legislating.
Yeah, I know you said that you had a lot of bipartisan support with the service members, but would you say you have similar bipartisan support or a little less on this legislation?
Too soon to tell on this particular legislation. We've just introduced the legislation this week, but I can tell you that there's been very strong bipartisan concern from members of Georgia's congressional delegation in both parties, strong criticism of the Postmaster General's performance by members of Georgia congressional delegation in both parties, and serious objections from Republican and Democratic senators from across the country to some of these serious failures of USPS leadership over the last year.
Thank you, man, and I hope your wife and daughter are well.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Julian. Quickly, let's go 11 Alive, one more, and then we'll end with Veronica Waters. Liza or Trizia, are you guys there from 11 Alive? All right, let's go Veronica, and then we'll come back to 11 Alive right after.
Thanks, Jake. Hi, Senator.
Hey.
Well, listen, just a couple of really quick questions. In which committee did you drop this legislation, if that's where it is right now? And then what do you specifically believe is going to be the thing that term limits does to light a fire under some future Postmaster General? Why term limits?
This will be referred to the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, on which I serve. And look, the best way to think about term limits for the Postmaster General is this, and to think about this overall legislation. We've seen the consequences of leadership failure at USPS. The job of Postmaster General is a really important job. It is a job where you should have to go through an interview process with the people's elected representatives. You should have to be confirmed as qualified and having a sound vision for USPS. And after 5 years, if you want to stay in that job, your performance should be reviewed by the US Senate. You should have to come before the Senate and defend the way that you've administered this important office, lay out your vision again, and submit once again to an interview from the people's elected representatives.
Do you think it's a job that is starting to feel, at least from the outside looking in, like one that's been taken for granted by whoever's in it now.
It's a job that's been done incompetently by someone not qualified or competent to do it. And that's why we need to raise the bar. That's why we need a tougher, more rigorous job interview with open hearings before the people's elected representatives, questions under oath before the elected people's representatives, and a vote by the people's elected representatives about whether or not someone's qualified, has the right values and the right vision for the post.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Veronica. And we will wrap now before this committee hearing. The question from 11 Live, Senator, what is your timeline? Do you plan to push this before the election in November? And logistics wise, would DeJoy be out or would a deputy take over until appointment?
This legislation would take effect upon the nomination of the next candidate to be Postmaster General. As for timeline, look, I got to get to the business of building bipartisan support, bringing Republicans and Democrats together to try to advance this legislation. We'll keep you posted as we make progress. Thank you all so much for your time, and thank you again for your patience. I know we began a few minutes late. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time.